And that was in 1967 when he wrote the book. So the Cold War was still going on. There were still Christians in the prison, right? And so he wrote the book very urgently to tell the rest of the world, the rest of the church, especially in Western countries, to inform them that there is Christian suffering and we need to be praying for them and helping them. And so I just want to read to you a little bit out of the book that you can have an idea of what he went through. And yeah, it's a very powerful book. And so I just like to read a bit out of it. Okay, here we go. So he says, a pastor by the name of Florescu was tortured with red-hot iron pokers and with knives. He was beaten very badly. Then starving rats were driven into his cell through a large pipe. He could not sleep because he had to defend himself all the time. If he rested a moment, the rats would attack him. He was forced to stand for 2 weeks, day and night. The communists wished to compel him to betray his brethren, but he resisted steadfastly. Eventually, they brought his 14-year-old son to the prison and began to whip the boy in front of his father, saying that they would continue to beat him until the pastor said what they wished him to say. The poor man was half mad. He bore it as long as he could. Then he cried to his son, Alexander, I must say what they want. I can't bear your beating anymore. The son answered, Father, don't do me the injustice of having a traitor as a parent. Withstand. If they kill me, I will die with the words, Jesus and my fatherland. The communists, enraged, fell upon the child and beat him to death, with blood spattered over the walls of the cell. He died praising God. Our dear brother Florescu was never the same after seeing this. Handcuffs with sharp nails on the insides were placed on our wrists. If we were totally still, they didn't cut us. But in the bitterly cold cells, when we shook with cold, our wrists would be torn by the nails. Christians were hung upside down on ropes and beaten so severely that their bodies swung back and forth under the blows. Christians were also placed in icebox refrigerator cells, which were so cold that frost and ice covered the inside. I was thrown into one while I had very little clothing on. Prison doctors would watch through an opening until they saw symptoms of freezing to death. Then they would give a signal, and guards would rush in to take us out and make us warm. When we were finally warmed, we would immediately be put back into the icebox cells to freeze. Thawing out, then freezing to within minutes of death, then being thawed out over and over again. Even today, there are times when I can't bear to open a refrigerator. We Christians were sometimes forced to stand in wooden boxes, only slightly larger than we were. This left no room to move. Dozens of sharp nails were driven into every side of the box, with their razor-sharp points sticking through the wood. While we stood perfectly still, it was all right. When we became fatigued and swayed with tiredness, the nails would pierce our bodies. If we moved or twitched a muscle, there were the horrible nails. What the communists have done to Christians surpasses any possibility of human understanding. I have seen communists whose faces while torturing believers shone with rapturous joy. They cried out while torturing the Christians, "We are the devil." We know about the love of Christ toward the communists by our own love toward them. I have seen Christians in communist prisons with 50 pounds of chains on their feet, tortured with red-hot iron pokers, in whose throats spoonfuls of salt have been forced, being kept afterward without water, starving, whipped, suffering from cold, and praying with fervour for the communists. This is humanly inexplicable. It is the love of Christ which was poured out in our hearts. So that's just a little taste of what's in the book. It is him sharing his story and his experience, but it's also a book pleading with us to remember the persecuted church and to pray for them and to learn from the way they suffer and the way they depend on God to help them. He writes to help us be content in our life and to be thankful and to lay down our life for the kingdom of God. And today, at the table at the back, I've got copies of the book. What we do at Voice of the Martyrs is we want to bless people so that they can be encouraged and convicted and challenged to have fellowship with the body of Christ around the world. And so we do not charge for the books. I'm not selling the books, okay? You can take it for free, all right? Of course, the books are not free. They cost us money, but we don't want to put a price on the persecuted church, you know? They are free. You can take it with you, but if you would like to give for a book, it's just what's on your heart, okay? But we're not charging for the books, and you can take it. If you're not able to give, that is fine. So I've got this one, I've got other ones there. You can have a look and I can tell you about the different books we have. And Matthew and Daniel will be helping me at the back as well. So after Richard came out and he wrote this book, he wanted to be a voice for the martyrs, for the Christian suffering. And that's how Voice of the Martyrs started. In America, it started in 1967, and then Richard started traveling around the world. He came to Australia in 1969, and we have been going since then. So for 50 plus years now. 2019 was our 50th anniversary. Richard died in the year 2001, and his wife died in the year 2000, so they are already gone. But we are carrying on their mission, because the need is very great. The need is greater today than it was during Richard's time. And we will talk about that very soon, the need and what is going on in the world. But before that, I want to read the key verse for Voice of the Martyrs. Okay? It's in Hebrews chapter 13, and it's verse 3. It says, "Remember those who are in prison, as though in prison with them, and those who are mistreated, since you also are in the body." Okay, so remember those who are in prison, as though in prison with them. Does this sound like the type of remembering where it comes to your mind every now and then? Doesn't sound like that, does it? When is it that normally, when you're remembering someone, you really feel like you're there with them? Who is it where you feel like that? Yeah, your relatives, right? Like if you hear that your child has been hurt and is in hospital, right? Maybe your grown child. You're there with them, you know, in your heart. You're thinking about them. Maybe you can't even go to sleep because you're anxious for them, right? Or if someone's going on a trip, your husband or your wife, you'll call them, make sure they arrive safely. It's like you're there with them. That's how we're being commanded to remember the persecuted church, as if we were in prison with them and remembering them as they're mistreated. And so the question for us is that how we think of the persecuted church? Or have we forgotten about them? Do we live our life not even thinking about the sufferings that are going on? We need to ask ourselves, am I remembering them? And if I'm not, what can I do to help myself remember them more? And I hope to provide some ways to help you remember them. Now, the reasoning for remembering them in that way, it says, for you also are part of the body. And we know about the body of Christ. We are one body, the church. And there's a verse that says, when one part of the body suffers, we all suffer. And Richard used to say something very powerful, and I hope this will help us think about this a bit more clearly. One of the things that they would do to Richard is they would beat him in his feet. And they beat him so badly that after he got out of prison, he couldn't walk normally. Often when he was sharing to churches, he'd have to sit down because he couldn't be standing for a long time. And he would say, why was it that when my feet were getting beaten, it was my lips that cried out? And why was it when I was being tortured that it was my eyes that were welling up with tears? Because I'm one body. And if you think of your own body, think of when you're in pain, your whole body is aware that that part is in pain. In fact, what are you going to do? You put everything aside until you can alleviate that pain, you know, because it's distracting and it's bothering you. Is that how we're thinking of the persecuted church? Are our hearts moved to alleviate their suffering with the means that we have? You know, are we moved to pray? Is there a burden to pray for them? And so that's what I want us to be thinking about. That's what the Bible means when it talks about fellowship. It is not just having food together and things like that. It is that is part of it. But fellowship goes deeper than that. It goes back to remembering who we are. We're one body, not just the local church, but the global church. One body and what that means, what follows on. If we're one body, it means if one part suffers, we all suffer. And if a part is suffering, then what does the body do to help the part that's suffering? You know? And you will find it's actually not just about us helping them, but them helping us. Because in the Western church, we have become lazy and unfaithful and worldly. And we need a reminder of what it truly means to follow Jesus. They may be in a worse situation physically, financially, but spiritually we may be in the worst situation. And we need them to remind us of what Jesus truly says about following him, about hating your life in this world, renouncing all that you have. Or you're not worthy of being my disciple. That's what Jesus said, where he said, a servant is not greater than his master. If the world hated me, they will hate you. Carrying your cross daily, these things that we don't think about or ignore in the Bible because we want to be comfortable and we forget about living as exiles in this world where this is war. This is where this life is to wage war. It is not to get comfortable and make our home here. Our home is not seen. It is not here in this life, but the life to come. And the persecuted church, as we remember them, then remind us about these things. They are God's way of helping us be true to him. And that's why fellowship is important, because we help them and they help us. Okay, and so that's, as I share the stories, as I talk about what we do, underneath that, I want you always asking yourself through what I share, how can I remember more? How can I be more involved? How can I be a part of the body, helping the other parts of the body? And I hope you're moved today to do that. Okay? So that's kind of the main point today of what I'm sharing. That's why I do what I do. Voice of the Martyrs has two main goals. One is to help the persecuted church through various ways of support, and the other is to bring the Western church into fellowship with them. And that is what I do. I'm not there on the front line. I'm not the one giving out Bibles or getting Christians out of dangerous places, but I'm here doing the other part of our mission, which is to bring you into fellowship with them. Okay? All right, so what is going on today then? Is the suffering really bad? Is it happening? Who feels they don't know very much about what is happening around the world at the moment? Maybe put your hand up. That's okay. Don't need to be embarrassed if you're not sure. I mean, some of you probably have a better idea. You guys, a lot of you are from Africa, and so you would know about what is happening in many countries in Africa. And we can probably start there, actually. If we look on the map that I've given everyone, you've got kind of a map on your chairs. So if we look at North Africa, nearly all of that in the red countries is Muslim persecution towards Christians. And a country I'd like to focus on is Nigeria. Last year, there was close to 6,000 Christians killed for their faith. So 6,000 martyrs. On average, that's about 16 a day. And that has been increasing each year. So the year before, it was on average 13 a day. Now 16 a day. In terms of kidnappings, there's many kidnappings as well. Maybe, I think it's like 3,000 to 4,000 kidnappings last year of Christians are the estimates. And many of those also happen in Nigeria. What happens in Nigeria in the north is there's areas in Nigeria where there's Fulani herdsmen and Boko Haram. And what especially the Fulani will do is they will go to a Christian village, they will burn the houses down, shoot the Christians, push them out of that land, and then take the land for themselves. And that is happening on a weekly basis in Nigeria. And there's some stories I have to share about some examples this year. For instance, there was a boy named Muhammad, a young person named Muhammad who became a Christian this year in Nigeria. And his father, his very own father, when he found out, tried to kill him and tried to cut off his legs. Now, he escaped, thankfully, and took refuge with a pastor. But then his brother became a Christian, which was wonderful news, and he rejoiced that his brother had become a Christian. But then his father slit the brother's throat. Another story that happened in Nigeria this year was a girl my age, 25 years old, on a WhatsApp message chat. She was thanking Christ for helping her with her exams. Her own classmates said that she was blaspheming Muhammad, and they stoned her to death in her school and beat her and stoned her till she died, and then they burnt her body at the school. So that is what is happening in Nigeria, for instance. And this is a good time to share with you about our magazine. So this is the Voice of the Martyrs magazine. And I said to you today that I'd share with you ways you can remember the persecuted church, where we can help you do that. Well, we understand that the Western lifestyle is very busy. It's hard to stop being busy. And plus, we have distractions of the social media, Netflix, the TV. There's so many things that are less important that are so easy to get distracted with. Plus the busyness. Even if you're impacted today, you will forget if there is not information being given to you on a regular basis. So I have a solution that is free to you. You don't have to pay for anything. You can just sign up to get the newsletter, and it's just once a month. So it's not every week. You won't get a giant stack of mail. Just once a month, you get this in the mail. It's a beautiful magazine. You have copies with you there. You can have a look. And in it are stories from the persecuted church. And you can be praying for them. This one from September was about Nigeria. The ones that you have there are copies from this month's one, which is about Uzbekistan. And so, yes, I will read a story out of one of these today to give you an idea about what it's like in these places. In fact, you know what? I'll read one out of the Nigeria one. Because you've got the Uzbekistan one, you can take that home and read that one for yourself. But I'll read you one out of Nigeria because you guys don't have a copy of the Nigeria one on you. So, okay, so let me read you the story of... I won't read the whole thing because it's a little bit long, but so this is about Pastor Emmanuel Maigari. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that properly, but he had just finished praying with his wife and mother-in-law on the evening of the 27th of February 2021, when the sound of gunfire erupted outside their home in Nigeria's Kaduna state. That is where the Fulanis are wreaking a lot of havoc. Within minutes, nearly 36 Fulani Islamic militants had burst into the house. The militants ripped the curtains from the windows and used them to bind and blindfold Emmanuel, his wife Ladi, and his mother-in-law. The attackers then took their phones and grabbed a box containing money that belonged to the pastor's church. "You are going to suffer in the bush," the group's leader said, "and if we like, we might kill you." But Emmanuel was unfazed by the militants' threat. "I've given myself over to God," he said boldly, "and I am ready to die." The men then led their captives into the forest. As the militants led their captives deeper into the forest, Ladi's mother began to slow their progress. Emmanuel begged the men to let her go, but they refused. Becoming more frustrated with her slow pace, one of the captors hit her on the head with the butt of his gun, and another cut her on the back of her neck with a machete, leaving her for dead. About an hour and a half later, the militants decided Ladi, his wife, was also expendable. Though they initially discussed killing her, they eventually released her and told her how to find her way home. Ladi's mother, who had been left behind earlier, also survived the ordeal. Emmanuel walked on, unsure whether he would ever see his family again. After walking for hours, Emmanuel finally arrived at the kidnappers' camp, where he began the most difficult month of his life. During the daytime, he was bound, blindfolded, and guarded by armed militants. At night, he and other kidnapping victims slept on the ground, where maggots crawled around their hands and feet. Our abductors used to go into town and buy drinks and plastic bottles, Emmanuel said. We would beg for the empty bottles and use them as pillows so the worms would not be able to enter our ears. Emmanuel's captors beat him frequently, sometimes so severely that others in the camp feared he had been killed. The militants broke his ribs on his right side, broke a finger on his left hand, and cut him with a machete on his lower back. The beating was a compulsory thing, he said. On Sundays they beat me because I was a pastor. There was a day they saw me praying and they almost beat me to death. I did not even know that I had fainted. After 3 days, I heard some of the other captives talking behind our shed. They said they thought I had died from the beating. They said the fact that I survived proves there is a God. The militants demanded 5 million naira, or about $17,000, from Emmanuel's family, threatening to kill him if they wouldn't pay. They took Emmanuel and the other captives to a boneyard to show them what would happen if their ransoms were not paid. Amid the bones, the captives saw the skeleton of a 3-month-old baby. The militants boasted about having shot the infant while being carried on his mother's back. They claimed to have removed the child's eyes and sent them to his father. Emmanuel's captors threatened similar atrocities against him if his family did not meet their demands. But Emmanuel was unmoved. If God says I will die here, then that will be my fate, he told them. If God says I will live, then I will live. Emmanuel trusted God to sustain him through whatever the militants had planned. I had faith that God was there with me, he said. I prayed constantly. If not for the help of God, I would have been beaten to death. If not for God's grace, I would have died. After a month and a day in the militants' camp, Emmanuel was finally released and returned to his family. He wept with joy as his blindfold was removed and his eyes gradually adjusted to the light. So that's the story of Pastor Emmanuel, and that's just one example of a kidnapping of many. Here it says, kidnapping has become commonplace in Kaduna State, Nigeria. Last year, frontline workers in the area tracked 3,348 kidnappings, including those of 180 students from Bethel Baptist High School in Maraban, Rido, as well as 1,192 murders. So, that is what is happening in Nigeria at the moment, and they really need our prayers. Apparently, 80% of the martyrs from last year came from Nigeria. So many people are being murdered in Nigeria, many people. Now, to talk about some other countries, if you go look on your map and you keep going east, of course you've got the Middle East there, so Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Syria. It's also Muslim persecution towards Christians there. And Matthew, if I can just get you to come up here for a second. Or maybe just stand on the map. Can everyone see Matthew? If you see his shirt, you can see the symbol on there. So that symbol is the Arabic letter equivalent to the letter N. And when ISIS came into Iraq and took over Iraq, they would spray that symbol on Christian businesses, on Christian houses. The reason why is to show that this is where a Christian lives. And when that mark was on the Christian house, they have to choose, or the Christian is either going to be killed, or they have to pay this very high tax, the jizya, or they have to convert to follow Islam. And so many Christians would just have to flee. But the reason it's that symbol is because in the Quran, Christians are referred to as Nazarenes, and that's why it's the Arabic N. And so this is a shirt that Voice of the Martyrs used to sell, not anymore. I only had a few and I give it to them to help me. But it's like saying, remember we're one body, I am also N. You know, we are all N, we are Nazarenes, and we're not ashamed to be one with these believers. And so yeah, thank you, Matthew. Now, if we go further east, we have some interesting countries that we don't always hear about. All of these Stan countries, you'll see Afghanistan, Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, Pakistan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, which is what the magazine is about. And so I won't speak much about those countries today. You have the magazine, you can bring it home, you can learn a bit about Uzbekistan. It is Muslim persecution to Christians again in Central Asia, in these countries. But you heard me talk about communism earlier. And during the Cold War, those are some of the countries that the Soviet Union took control over. And so even though the Soviet Union doesn't control them anymore, there is still some influence in the government there that is the way the communists used to run. So you have like a mix of like communist government and Muslim culture mixing together where the Christians get persecuted. Now, if we keep going east, we get to India. And India is quite close to my heart, actually. There's many Indians here in Perth, many Indians, and I have a heart to reach out to them. But their religion is Hinduism. They are Hindus. And what's happening at the moment is the government, the corrupt government in India, is sympathetic to the cause of people who are very, very zealous and want the extremists, and they want the whole country to be Hindu. Where if you are not a Hindu, you should not be in India. You should not even be classified as an Indian citizen. And what they will do, kind of like in Nigeria, they will go through villages with clubs and sticks and try to purge the village of Christians. In one of our previous magazines about India, there was a story in there of a pastor with his church It was the third attack already. So they'd already had 2 attacks. This was the third attack. They came in, a mob came in, locked the church from the inside, and for 45 minutes beat the Christians with whatever they could find. The pastor was getting beaten, and he had his 11 to 13-year-old daughter begging them to stop. So they started kicking her on the floor, and her injuries, she suffered internal injuries that were so bad it took more than a week for her to heal from those injuries. Now, in one of the earlier attacks, because there was 3 of them, his wife was pregnant and she was beaten and she lost her baby. And so that's happening in India. And what they're also doing in India, in different states, and more are doing it, they are passing these laws called anti-conversion laws. And so what the law is in these states is, because in India there's supposed to be religious freedom. There's supposed to be religious freedom in India, but then these laws say a Christian can't bribe someone to become a Christian, or they can't coerce someone to become a Christian. But the thing is, Christians are not doing that. But because it's corrupt, people can say, oh, this Christian, what they'll do is they'll come, they'll beat up the Christian, and then they'll go to the authorities and say, this Christian is doing the wrong thing, they're bribing people, and then the Christian will get in even more trouble. And they will use anything, even if the Christian is doing humanitarian work, like feeding, just, trying to feed people, even if they're not going to become Christian, just serving the community. They'll say, look, they're bribing people by feeding them. So they really twist it to make the Christians sound like bad people who are breaking the law. So that's what's happening in India. And now as we kind of get towards the end of the map on the right-hand side, we have the communist countries of today. Right? The big communist countries, China, North Korea, and if you start going into Southeast Asia, you have Vietnam and Laos. And the other one, all the way on the other side of the map, is Cuba. But they're the big 5 communist countries today. China, North Korea, Laos, Cuba, and Vietnam. And I'll just talk about a couple of them. North Korea is probably the worst country in the world of all the countries persecuting Christians. The leader is Kim Jong-un, and Kim Jong-un is like the people in the country worship him. They have pictures of him in their houses. Before they eat their food, it's almost like they have to pray to him. They have to thank him for the food. And if you even say the word God, you can be sent to a camp because you're invoking a name above him. And you would have heard of the Nazis, right? And what they did to the Jews and the camps, the concentration camps. Those exist in North Korea. And there is an estimated 30,000 plus Christians in these camps, these labor camps and these concentration camps. They will work these people very, very hard with very little food. And we've had statistics where 40% of people die from starvation in these camps. But sometimes for the Christians, what they will do is they will just beat them to death. We've even had reports of their mouths being filled with gravel and then being beaten to death in North Korea. In China, we have Xi Jinping, and he is now implementing laws that what people are saying, it's the worst persecution in 40 years in China. This year in March, they passed a law where you cannot put anything religious online. Nothing. No social media apps. You can't have church online. You can't put a picture of you praying. You can't do any of that unless you get a special license. So imagine not being able to put a Bible verse or not even being able to share a scripture to someone on like Messenger, for instance. You cannot do that. You're not allowed to. And because it's getting more restricted, it's hard for churches to meet. And so they will go online to meet, but now they can't do that either. And so that's happening in China. In China, you cannot share the gospel with a child. So if a child is anyone under 18, you can't share the gospel with them. And there's laws that were passed this year that enable the government to control what parents even teach their children in the home. So that's what's with communist countries. It's really about control, really lots and lots of control and pressure to, there's many pastors in China who get sent to prison. In fact, what they say in China is, their Bible college is prison. They will talk about how many degrees they have in prison theology. That is, in fact, sometimes they will not even let someone in China be a leader unless they've been to prison. That is the reality of the church in China. But it is growing very fast in these places. They now have 750 million cameras in China that can recognize your face. 750 million cameras. Yeah, it is the most sophisticated monitoring network ever in history. It's just everywhere you go, they can monitor. And they have this social credit system where you get points in society for obeying the government and doing what they want and telling on others. But then if you don't obey the government, and there's many ways where a Christian will live differently to how the government wants, you get a low social credit score, and that affects how you can travel, it affects how you can buy things, purchase things. So that's what it's like in China. I've actually been to China, and even this is something I found out when I was there, even with the time, right? Because we went to different parts of China. China's a big country, right? Australia has 2 time zones because we're quite big as well. But in China, they only have 1 time wherever you live in China, because it's got to be the same time. They have 3. No, it's 2. It does have 3. Oh, my bad. I'm always thinking of Sydney and Perth. Anyway, so they so like that's just to give you an idea what China is like. And finally, a country that I will also share about. Oh, actually, another one that I missed. I'll talk about a couple more actually. Going back to Central Asia, Afghanistan and Pakistan. I just want to share about Afghanistan. Are you aware of what happened last year? It was all on the news when the Taliban came into Afghanistan. So that there was already persecution happening in Afghanistan, but now it has gone through the roof because the Taliban are hunting Christians. What's happening is many Christians have just gone underground. We've lost contact with them. And they are just continually having to move from place to place because the Taliban are hunting them using GPS tracking, phone tracing, so they can't even have their phone on. Just imagine waking up each day not knowing who to trust, not knowing if you're going to have to move your family again. So it's very, very bad in Afghanistan at the moment. And something that we do sometimes is if it's really bad persecution in like a village or something, we will try to relocate a family. But many times Christians want to stay to try to be a light, and we will support them. But in Afghanistan at the moment, it is so bad that you can't establish anything because you're just getting hunted. And so you're just continually running away. You're kind of like David, the story of David in the Bible when Saul was hunting him. It's like that for the Afghan Christians at the moment. Very severe. And so we are trying to do a bigger effort to relocate them out of Afghanistan. And it's very dangerous work. You can imagine how you have to communicate with the people and be careful how to do that. Actually, I'll read you something. This is someone who we were able to get out, and they've shared about their experience. Reading it from their perspective really helps you understand just how, scary this is for them. Just give me 1 second. I wasn't planning on sharing this, but it won't take me long to find it. Yeah, well, while that's loading, don't know why it's... Okay, here we go. Okay. Okay, yeah. So SQ is the name. I think it's just like not her real name, but just, So SQ is a young woman from Afghanistan. She was evacuated from Afghanistan by VOM partners and is now safe. So this is her story in her own words. I am SQ. I was one of the children who had faced the Taliban in the past and have been witness of their tortures and oppression. At that time, I used to wear boys' clothes and was the breadwinner of a family of 8 members. My father was sentenced to prison for no reason. When I was going to see my father in the city, they were beating me in front of my father to torture him. It was the worst memory of my life that I can never forget. After all this happened, I still wanted to live in Afghanistan, become a designer and serve my homeland. It was evening when I found out that my city had fallen into the control of the Taliban. I was shocked and I was not able to control my tears. I could only see darkness and I was thinking that the world has come to an end. I decided to get out of Afghanistan and contacted anyone I knew, but I wasn't receiving any good news and didn't know how to get out of there. It looked like all doors are closed and there is no way out. Luckily, I received a phone call. It said that I am listed for evacuation and have to be ready. It was the best news I heard since the occupation of Afghanistan by Taliban. Some days later, once more I got a call with a location. I was told to get there within 15 minutes because there is not time due to security issues. I arrived at the given location and got into the bus, believing that I am leaving Afghanistan and leaving behind all the restrictions. During the trip to airport, I was praying not to face any problems or not get stopped by any Taliban member, because every Taliban decides his own rules. As we arrived to the airport gate, our bus was stopped and one Taliban entered the bus to check passengers. He was asking questions of people who were looking suspicious to him. When he reached me, he asked me where are my other family members, since I was with my sister and had no male family member with me. He told me that I cannot leave and have to get out of the bus. He wanted to take me out of the bus, but the passengers did not allow him. It looked like he was not happy with the evacuation, but he has no other choice except to leave the bus to enter the airport. He was continually using ugly words and left the bus. While he was arguing, I was thinking that either he will start beating me or will say that no one is allowed to the airport, and I was feeling that I'm once more stuck in Afghanistan. He permitted us to enter the airport. It looked like fresh air is coming and I can breathe freely with no tension. As I was getting closer to boarding, I was getting more hope of life and better future. As I got into the waiting room and boarding, I was able to see my future in freedom. Once the aeroplane took off from the runway, I was feeling that the world is so calm. When we left the sky over Afghanistan, I was able to see the brightness of my future, and once more I was free to think about my future and dream. Reading that, it really hits me how much what we take for granted here, like how real it felt for her finally just to be calm, just to have that feeling that things are going to be okay now, and so at the moment that is one thing we're trying to do, is relocate these believers out of Afghanistan, because it's very bad there, and especially for women. It is terrifying for women. They will be raped. What they do in some of these Muslim countries, even for young girls, the punishment for converting, they will bring a Muslim in to rape a girl. or they will force a girl to marry a Muslim. But sometimes they don't force the marriage, they just will let her be raped as a punishment. And sometimes they have children because of that. In Nigeria, we actually have a training facility which is to kind of provide help for young girls who are pregnant or just have gone through that, or who don't have a home anymore, or for orphans, or for people wanting to be an evangelist in Nigeria. There's a place we have there to help these people. So that's another way we help. And yes, in Pakistan, kidnappings are also very bad in Pakistan, and even young girls. 2 stories from this year. There was a 12-year-old girl. These are both about 12-year-old girls. So one of them, the next door neighbor kidnapped her. A grown man kidnapped her, took her to another place, got her to put her thumb on documents, and said to her, "You are now my wife, and you are Muslim now, not Christian." Now the father talked to the police, and in this instance, the police actually helped, which is good. Sometimes they do not help. And they retrieved her, they brought her back, but the neighbor received no consequences. And he is still threatening the family, saying, "She is my wife, you need to give her back." Now, another occasion like this occurred with another 12-year-old who was kidnapped. But what they did to her is they said to her, "If you say anything when we get taken to court by the family, if you say anything that will lead to us being condemned, we will kill your brothers." And so what the girl said is she lied about her age. She said, "I'm 14, which is still illegal. 16 is the legal age, but she's 12, and she said she's 14. She said, "I'm 14, and I've chosen to be in this marriage." But it's because she was coerced, saying they will kill her brothers. And in the court, the family provided the evidence. They said she was coerced, she was kidnapped, and the judge threw out the case and didn't even do anything. And so this family still does not have legal custody of their daughter. So right now there's a 12-year-old who is with a man who kidnapped her, threatened to kill her family, and the judge didn't even do justice. Because for the judge, who's also Muslim, the girl was now converted. And so that's good. That's how they think about it. It doesn't matter how you do it. If you can convert someone, even a girl, by forcing her to marry, then that you'll be blessed by Allah for doing that. So that's just Pakistan. And the final country just to bring mention to, just because it's so close to us, the country right above Australia is Indonesia. And we often think of North Africa and the Middle East when we think of Muslims, but Indonesia actually has more Muslims than any other country, and they are just above us, and they are same persecution is happening there as well. And even in the Philippines, where my mum is from, Mindanao, you'll see they're just above Indonesia is the southern part of the Philippines. There's a dominant Muslim presence there too. So I've tried to just give you an idea of what's happening around the world, you know. If you look at that map, you kind of realize that this is, you could say it's just never stopped, you know. It's not like what we read about in the book of Acts stopped and now Christianity is like we experience here in the West. No, it's still going on. People are still needing to trust God to take them out of prison or to persevere in prison, just like Paul had to, just like Peter had to, just like James had to. And so, what are we to do? Well, first of all, we need to pray for them. That is the one thing that everyone in this room can do. Everyone in this room can pray. And when you get the news updates, the magazine, the email that has information as well, you will have things you can pray for. You will know how to pray for these people. We give you prayer points as well, especially on the email that comes once a week. Now, Of course, we are very blessed financially in the West. And I myself, before working for Voice of the Martyrs actually, just reading the Bible and seeing what the Bible says about where our money should go, there are some very strong scriptures about helping your brother who is in need. And so I felt convicted myself to start giving regularly to the persecuted church. And so for those who would like to do that today, whether it's donating when you get a book or even wanting to give ongoing, if some of you are moved to do that, that's what I do. It helps us budget and so on if people are giving regularly. Just to give you peace of mind, we are an Australian charity, okay? And so what that means is we're registered with the government. It means we have to do audits with the government. They need to check and make sure we're doing everything the right way. We don't just support anyone. We have to have a proper process to make sure that the people we're supporting are reliable, where they're sending us evidence of what they're doing with the money. And the other thing that we promise is if you give, we will give 100% of what you give wherever you want it to go. So Bibles, for instance, are $8. If you gave $1 for a Bible, 100 cents of the $1 will go. So we won't take any of it out. All of it will go where you want it to go. And so I guess I'll end with just some practical things we are doing to help, because that way if you'd like to give today, you can decide where you'd like to support. We have Bibles, first of all. This year we've tried to distribute 150,000 Bibles. There are two things the persecuted church asks for first above everything else, even if they have a lot of other needs. It's for prayer and for Bible. That's what they will ask for first. My boss, the CEO, has seen whole Bibles handwritten where the believers have copied it word for word so that they can have their own copy and pass it on. Sometimes they will tear pages out and share those pages with each other and take turns because they only have one Bible. So for $8, you can be providing a Bible that could be serving 5 families, and we think how many Bibles we have here. Again, we've got the Afghanistan campaign at the moment too, okay? That's another one. If you need to be reminded at the end, you can talk to me, but just to give you an idea of what we're doing at the moment. We have a Frontline Workers Fund. The Frontline Workers Fund supports evangelists and pastors of the underground church. Some of these people, some of you would know about this, they walk for miles to see their different churches. And Bible training is so important because the church is growing so fast. The rate of growth is overtaking the leaders. And it's important that there's not wrong doctrine being taught. And you can imagine the stress for a pastor who maybe has 10 different churches and then he gets put in prison, and who's going to disciple his believers. So it's really important, that fund, that Frontline Workers Fund, that we can equip these pastors, whether it's giving them a motorbike or paying for their rent so that they don't have to be worried about that working as well as doing ministry, or helping them start a small business so that they can then be self-sufficient, or giving them training. So that's another one we have. And then we have a fund for families and martyrs that supports children who maybe have lost both their parents, or a mother who's maybe lost her husband and it's hard for her to work for her family. One example of what we do with the money that goes into the Families Fund. In some rural communities, they will have a well, like for water, and if you're a Christian family, you will not be allowed access anymore to that clean water. And so what we have done is dug wells so that the Christians can still have access to water. It can also be providing education for children, because some children will be kicked out of school if they are a believer. So that's the families one. And then we also have a medical fund, which is quite obvious what that's for, from just starvation, from torture, from being beaten. We pay for surgeries, for medication. Sometimes it's even just basic health care. During COVID, in a lot of these poor countries, if you were a Christian, you were denied any medical help during COVID. That's the sort of discrimination that was going on. So we have a medical fund to provide for those needs. And there's one more fund, which is a temporary one, which I always get excited about this because I love kids. I love working with kids. In December, we have a Christmas care campaign. And what we do is we raise money to put together care packs for children who are really suffering because their families are being persecuted. And what it is, it's a pack that has essential items that could be stationery for school or medication, like medical supplies or food, or even just like a simple toy, and then a Bible. And we give that to the kids at Christmas time because their parents don't have enough money to get them a Christmas present or even a Bible. And so a Christmas pack is about $30 roughly. And so there are different ways you can support what we're doing overseas. And again, if you gave, say, $20 to the Christmas care, all of that $20 would go to Christmas care. Okay, we promise that that's what we do with the money. And so, yeah, you can talk to me at the back, but there's just many ways you can help on a more physical level, you know. And again, there's the option to give on an ongoing basis as well, especially to the funds like the frontline workers and Bibles. That's really where that ongoing commitment is very helpful. All right, so thank you for patiently listening to me. The very last thing I want to say to end all of this, because I think it's important to end talking about these things the right way. How should we be feeling after this, you know? Because there's many things that we could be feeling. We could be feeling hatred, you know, towards these Muslims. We could be feeling anger at what they're doing. We could be feeling despair. We could be feeling deep sorrow in our heart and just feeling overwhelmed at the evil. We could be feeling pity and just going, these poor Christians, you know, how can they even be going through this? And even though I think it's natural and right for us to feel some of those things, you know, we should be feeling angry at evil. We should be feeling compassion, you know, towards our brothers and sisters, especially compassion that moves us to help. And we should be feeling perhaps a bit shook, you know, but we shouldn't let those things be too overwhelming. We should also be full of joy, because the thing is, these believers show us that we serve a living God who's full of power. You know, often we think of faith as, you know, leading to miracles and signs and wonders. If you read the book of Hebrews, there is a list in chapter 11 of the great men and women of the faith. And there is this list where half of that list is things like being saved from the fire, women having their loved ones back from the dead. But if you look at the other half of that list, it's not deliverance. It's perseverance through intense suffering. And so we see the faith that God is producing in these people to help them go through it, and the perspective they have of eternity. They are looking ahead, and they are the winners. They are the victors. In this life, they are the victims, but great is their reward. And I want us leaving today to be a part of that. Again, about fellowship, where we have the same perspective, where we're rejoicing in the life to come, and not getting stuck in this life thinking about what we can collect in this life. It's not about that. It's about eternity and what's important, the kingdom of God and sharing the gospel. And where we're so fixed on that whatever comes, we are courageous and gracious and forgiving and loving, and where our persecutors come to Christ, because they see that we love them and where we're also not attached to the things of this world, where Christ is all satisfying to us. And so I do want us to feel sadness. I do want us to feel motivated strongly to help and to pray, but I also want us to have joy and hope and to realize that at the end of the day, we are not the defeated ones. We serve a resurrected King who will one day bring righteousness and will reign forever and ever. And we are all united under him as the head of the church, as one body. So let us be the body at this time while we're waiting for Christ to come and think of our persecuted brothers and sisters. So thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, brother. Thank you. Let's stand up on our feet. We're going to sing one song. We are heirs of the Father. We are joint heirs with the Son. We are children of the kingdom. We are family. We are one. Father, we want to thank you for Voice of the Martyrs. We want to thank you for using them to challenge us, oh Lord, in our Christian faith today. And Lord, we pray for support from heaven